My brother slept with my fiancée, stole our entire wedding fund, and my parents helped cover it all up. So I cut them off forever and watched their world slowly collapse. But before I tell you exactly what they did, you need to understand one thing about Keaton. Because without this context, none of it will make sense. Keaton is 3 years older than me and has spent most of his life operating on the assumption that being first made him better. First to drive, first to get a job, first to buy a place. Our parents treated every one of these milestones like he had invented something. Meanwhile, I was finishing a finance degree, working nights, and building a consulting pipeline that was starting to actually move and that got a nod and a good for you. Brenner at dinner and nothing more. That is not a complaint. That is just the architecture of the family I grew up in. Keaton ran a real estate development firm. Small, maybe 8 people, but loud about itself the way Keaton was loud about everything. He wore his success like a costume. The watches, the dinners, the name dropping. He was good at performing. The idea of doing well, whether the business itself was healthy was a different question, one I never thought to ask at the time. Ivy had been in my life for 4 years. We met at an industry event. She ran the PR division of a mid-sized firm, sharp, polished, the kind of person who knew exactly how a room worked the moment she walked into it. I respected that about her. I loved her in the way that you love someone you genuinely believe in, not just someone you want. We got engaged 14 months before any of this happened. I bought her a ring I have been thinking about for 6 months. I booked a venue. I set up a joint account for wedding expenses and we both contributed to it steadily until the balance was where we needed it to be. I made Keaton my best man because he was my brother. That is the only reason. There does not need to be more to it than that. The pre-wedding weekend was at a hotel about 2 hours outside the city, a place Ivy had picked because it had both a ceremony space and accommodation so extended family could stay on site without logistics becoming a nightmare. I thought it was a good call. That was a Friday. The wedding was Sunday. Friday evening, I had dinner with 2 old colleagues who happened to be in the area. Unplanned, a quick meal, nothing that was supposed to run long. It did not. I was back at the hotel by 9:15, maybe 9:20, walking down the 3rd floor corridor toward the room Ivy and I were sharing. I heard a door close before I turned the corner. Keaton was about 15 feet ahead of me, moving in the opposite direction. He was straightening his jacket with one hand, the other hanging loose at his side. He did not see me. He was not looking back. He turned the corner at the far end of the hall and was gone. What stopped me was not seeing him on that floor. It was his wrist. 3 years ago, for his birthday, I had commissioned a pair of custom silver cuff links, not off the shelf, actually made. Both our initials worked into the design. It was one of those gifts I had thought about carefully, the kind of thing you give someone when you actually want to mark something. He had worn them twice that I had seen. Both times he made a point of mentioning them. He was wearing them that night coming out of Ivy's room at 9:20 on the Friday before my wedding. I stood in that corridor for maybe 30 seconds. Not frozen, just processing. There is a difference. My brain was running through what I had seen and filing it correctly, and the filing process took 30 seconds. That is all. I did not call after him. I did not go to Ivy's door. I turned around, went back to the elevator, rode it down to the ground floor, and sat at the hotel bar. I ordered 1 drink. Scotch, no ice. I did not touch it for about 5 minutes. I just sat there and thought through what I actually knew versus what I was assuming. And by the time I'd done that, honestly, the gap between the two was very small. I paid the tab. I left the drink mostly full. When I got back to the room, Ivy was in bed reading on her phone. She looked up, said something about me being back early, asked if dinner was good. I told her it was fine, said I was tired, and got ready for bed. She turned the light off on her side. I lay there in the dark. I was not going to say anything that night, not because I was scared of the conversation, but because I needed to know how deep this actually went before I opened my mouth. Confronting Keaton in a corridor on instinct was not a plan. It was just noise. So instead, around midnight, once I was certain Ivy was asleep, I picked up my phone and opened the app for our joint wedding account. I had checked the balance 4 days earlier. It had been sitting at $93,200. The number on the screen was $4,800. I sat up in bed and went through every transaction. It took about 20 minutes. The account had a full history going back to when we opened it, and I went through it line by line, quietly, screen brightness turned all the way down. What I found was not a single large withdrawal. It was a series of them structured to look like vendor payments spread across 19 days. The amounts ranged from $3,000 to $14,000. Some were labeled with business names I did not recognize. One was tagged as a deposit refund, which makes no sense. You do not get deposit refunds sent to a joint wedding account. 2 transfers went directly to what looked like a personal card. No business name attached. $88,400. Gone in 19 days. The timing meant it started while I was traveling for work 2 weeks prior, which also meant Ivy had been watching this happen or making it happen while sending me photos of venue centerpiece option. I took screenshots of everything, all of it. Then I emailed them to myself from a secondary account I used for work documents, Something Ivy did not know about and had no access to. Then I put my phone down and lay back in the dark. I did not sleep, but I was not spiraling either. I was organizing. The next morning, I found my parents at breakfast before anyone else came down. I sat across from them, kept my voice low and even, and told them exactly what I had seen in the corridor and exactly what I had found in the account. I did not editorialize. I just laid it out: time, location, the cuff links, the transaction history, the amounts, the dates. My father's face went through about 4 different expressions before settling into something pale and still. My mother put her coffee cup down. There was a pause, maybe 10 seconds. Then my mother said, "There has to be an explanation." Not, "That is devastating." Not, "Are you okay?" Not even, "We will get to the bottom of this." Just an immediate pivot to finding the exit ramp. My father said Caton had mentioned some cash flow stuff with the business recently, and maybe there had been some kind of miscommunication about the account. A miscommunication about $88,000. I asked them plainly whether they understood what I was telling them. I was not describing a miscommunication. I was describing my brother walking out of my fiancée's hotel room the night before my wedding while $88,000 of my money was sitting in accounts I did not control. My mother reached across the table and put her hand on my arm and said, "Brenner, you do not want to blow up the family over one bad decision." I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her face. She meant it as comfort. That is the part that is hardest to explain to people who did not grow up in that dynamic. She genuinely thought she was helping. She thought the thing that needed protecting in that moment was the structure of the family. The surface of it, the version of it that looked okay from the outside. She had been maintaining that surface her whole life. It was instinct. I removed her hand from my arm gently. I told them I would talk to them later. Then I stood up and left the table. Ren had been my lawyer since we were at university together. She had gone into financial law, built a solid practice, and was one of maybe 4 people in my life I trusted without reservation. I called her from a stairwell on the 2nd floor. Standing with my back to the wall, voice low. I gave her the summary in under 4 minutes. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. Did I have documentation, and had I confronted anyone yet? Yes and no. She told me not to confront anyone until we had spoken properly and to not move any money or close any accounts until she had reviewed everything. She said she would clear her afternoon. I went back to the room, waited until Ivy was in the shower, and started making calls. The venue first. I told them there had been a family emergency and the event needed to be cancelled. They walked me through the cancellation terms. I would lose a portion of the deposit, which at this point felt like the least relevant detail in my life. Then the caterer, then 2 other vendors. I kept each call under 3 minutes. By the time Ivy came out of the bathroom, I was packed. I was closing my bag when Caton knocked and let himself in. Ivy must have given him a key at some point, which told me everything I needed to know about the timeline of whatever this was. He stood in the doorway taking in the bag, my jacket on, my expression, and he laughed. He actually laughed. He said I was being dramatic. Said I always had to make everything about myself. Said if I just calmed down, we could figure this out like adults. I zipped the bag, picked it up, walked past him without making eye contact. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and sent Ren a text, "Start the research, everything." Then I opened a travel app and booked the first available one-way flight I could find going as far from that hotel as a direct route would take me. I did not tell anyone which city. I did not tell anyone I was leaving, I just left. And the strangest part, the part I have thought about more than once since then, is that the moment the elevator doors closed, I felt completely calm, not numb, not broken, just clear in a way I had not felt in years. That feeling did not go away when I landed. It is mostly still there now, but I am getting ahead of myself because what I did not know yet, sitting on that flight with my bag in the overhead compartment and Ren's number in my recent calls, was that walking away was only the first move. I had not decided anything about what came next. Not yet. The city I landed in was one I had visited twice for work. Once for a conference, once to meet a potential client who never converted. I knew it well enough to move around without feeling lost, and I knew nobody there well enough that I would have to explain myself. That was the entire criteria. I was not running toward anything yet. I was just removing myself from a situation where every person around me had a vested interest in how I responded. I took a furnished short-term lease under my own name. No reason to be coy about where I slept. What I was careful about was everything else. The new business structure, the accounts attached to it, the property moves I was already starting to think about. None of that would have my name on the surface. Not because I was doing anything that required hiding, but because I had watched Caton operate loudly and publicly his entire career and I had seen exactly how exposed that made you when things shifted. I was not going to make the same mistake. Thornfield Capital took about 6 weeks to set up properly. Ren handled the structure, a series of holding entities that were entirely legal and entirely unremarkable to anyone who did not know what they were looking at. The name meant nothing to anyone. That was the point. I identified 3 commercial properties in markets I had been tracking for 2 years, put in the work, and made the first acquisition at month 4. Modest, clean, Mine. Freya had worked 2 desks down from me at my old firm for 3 years. We were not close in the way that required regular contact, but we were honest with each other in the way that made occasional contact worth having. She reached out about 6 weeks after I left, not to pry, just to check in. I told her I had relocated and was building something new. She did not push for details. What she did do over the following months was pass along things she thought I would want to know. Not gossip, just information. Through Priya, I learned that Ivy was telling people I had had some kind of breakdown, that the wedding fell apart because I could not handle pressure. It was a clean narrative. It made Ivy sympathetic and made me invisible, which probably felt like the same thing to her. Ketan had inserted himself as the grieving older brother, publicly concerned, privately thriving. People who did not know better bought it because Ketan had always been good at the performance. I filed all of this away and kept working. What I did next, I want to be precise about because I am not interested in making it sound like something it was not. Ren had spent 3 weeks going through every public filing Ketan's firm had submitted over the past 4 years. Investor decks, property disclosures, contribution reports. She found 2 irregularities, not minor clerical errors, actual inconsistencies in how investor contributions had been categorized and reported. The kind of thing that, if looked at carefully by the right people, would raise serious questions. She documented everything with sources. All of it publicly available information. All of it already on record. We submitted a formal complaint to the relevant regulatory body. Documented, sourced, traceable to nothing but the public record. That is it. We did not fabricate a single number. We did not create anything that was not already there. We just made sure the right people were looking at what was already there. Whatever happened after that was the system working the way it was designed to work. The situation with Ivy required a different approach, and I want to be equally precise here. Through Priya, I learned the name of the senior client at Ivy's firm, an executive she had apparently been involved with before and during her time with me. I did not find this shocking. It fit. What I also found through a fairly brief search of a private industry forum I had legitimate access to through a former colleague were screenshots that were already circulating in a limited way. Photos, messages, enough to make the nature of the relationship obvious to anyone in her professional circle. The screenshots were already out there. They had not gone anywhere significant yet. I did not post them. I routed them to a contact in her industry through a third party, someone with their own reasons to find this information relevant, and left it there. What that contact chose to do with them was their decision. They posted them to an internal industry Slack group. I did not watch it unfold. I went back to work. 7 months in, Thornfield closed its second acquisition. I hired a part-time analyst named Corbin, who was methodical and did not ask unnecessary questions. The work was good. The structure was holding. I had a routine. Early mornings, long focused days, evenings that were quiet in a way I had not had in years. I was seeing someone. I will leave her out of this because she has nothing to do with it and deserves that. But she existed and she was a reason the days felt like something worth being in. I did not think about the hotel corridor often. When I did, it was briefly the way you check that a door is locked. Not out of fear, just confirmation. Then one evening, Priya called. Her voice was careful in a way I recognized the tone people use when they are trying to figure out how much they actually know before they say it out loud. She told me Ketan's investors were pulling out that Ivy's firm had announced an internal investigation. She said she had been hearing both things independently of each other and the timing was hard to ignore. Then she asked me directly, "Is this you?" I thought about it for exactly 1 second. "I am just watching," I said. I hung up. What I did not tell Priya, what I had not told anyone was that the watching was almost over because Ren had just sent me a document that afternoon and what was in it meant the next phase was not going to stay quiet much longer. The document Ren sent me was 41 pages. I read it in one sitting. It was a compiled summary of everything that had happened with Ketan's business since the regulatory complaint was filed. Audit notices, investor correspondence she had obtained through legitimate channels, and a timeline of how Ketan's firm had responded to each escalation. The picture it painted was not of a business having a rough quarter. It was of a structure that had been quietly unstable for years, held together by new investor money cycling in fast enough to cover the gaps left by the last round. The audit had not created the problem. It had just shone a light on something that was already there. Ren had added a single note at the bottom of the document. No formatting, just plain text. He was going to end up here eventually. We just moved the timeline. I closed the document and went to bed. The first civil suit was filed 11 days later. An investor group, 3 individuals who had put in a combined $400,000 across 2 of Ketan's development projects, retained counsel and filed in civil court, alleging misrepresentation of projected returns and improper use of contributed funds. I read the filing summary and a legal news digest I subscribed to. Ketan's name was on it. So was his firm's. The second suit came 3 weeks after that. Different investors, similar allegations through Priya. I heard that Ketan's business partner had issued a public statement distancing himself from the firm's recent activities. Careful lawyerly language that essentially said, I was not involved in these decisions without explicitly saying Caton made them alone. It was the kind of statement you issue when you have already spoken to your own attorney and been told to establish distance immediately. Caton's response to all of this was to call me 14 times in the first month after the suits were filed. I know the number because my phone logged it. The calls went to voicemail. I did not listen to any of them past the first few seconds long enough to confirm it was him. Not long enough to hear what he was saying. I did not need to hear it. I could reconstruct the arc of it from first principles. First indignant, then explanatory, then pleading. That is always how it went with Caton. He worked through the registers in order. Ivy's situation moved faster than Caton's and hit harder in ways that mattered more to her specifically. The screenshots spread beyond the internal Slack group. Within a week, someone in the group forwarded them to an industry newsletter that covered the PR sector, the kind of publication that everyone in the field read, but nobody admitted to reading closely. The newsletter ran a brief item. Anonymous sources, enough detail to be identifiable to anyone who worked in her orbit. Her firm's largest client, the same executive involved in the screenshots, terminated the engagement within 48 hours of the newsletter item running. The firm's response was to announce an internal review, which in practice meant Ivy was placed on administrative leave while they determined how exposed they were. I found this out through Priya, who found it out through someone who worked in an adjacent firm and had seen the newsletter item. What struck me hearing it was not satisfaction. It was something closer to recognition. Ivy had built her entire professional identity on the careful management of other people's reputations. She understood image as a currency better than almost anyone I had met. And now she was watching hers dissolve in the same industry she had spent a decade cultivating through exactly the kind of semiblic, hard-to-contain leak that she would have known professionally was almost impossible to recover from quickly. She would have known what it meant the moment the newsletter item went live. That is the part that required no additional commentary from me. Then my parents did something I had not anticipated. Though looking back, I probably should have. Caton went to them not to confess, not to ask for forgiveness, but to ask for help, specifically for them to co-sign 2 bridging loans that he said would stabilize the business while the suits were being resolved. He framed it as temporary. He told them the audit findings were minor and would be cleared up. He told them the civil suits were nuisance claims from investors who had misunderstood the risk structure of the projects. My parents co-signed. I found this out through Priya, who heard it from a family friend who had not realized the information would make its way back to me. When I heard it, I sat with it for a long moment. There was a version of this where I told them what I knew about the actual state of Caton's business and what those loans were likely to become. I thought about that version seriously. Then I thought about my mother's hand on my arm at the breakfast table, her voice telling me not to blow up the family over one bad decision. And I realized that any call I made now would be characterized by Caton immediately as me interfering out of spite. They had chosen what they believed. They were entitled to live in it. I did not call. Caton's narrative had been shifting for weeks by this point. First, the audit was a bureaucratic formality. Then it was an anonymous bad faith complaint from someone in the industry. Then, and Priya told me this with a specific careful flatness in her voice, it became me, Brenner, the bitter younger brother who had filed false complaints out of jealousy and sabotaged a legitimate business because he could not handle being left behind. He was telling this to anyone who would listen. Some people in his circle believed him, or at least found it plausible enough to repeat. I heard it and thought, let him. A man publicly blaming his arranged younger brother for his own audit findings is not a man who looks like he is going to be fine. Caton looked like a lot of things by that point. Fine was not one of them. I was in the middle of reviewing acquisition documents for Thornfield's third property deal when my personal email flagged a new message. Unknown sender, no name attached to the address, just a string of letters and numbers. The subject line read, "I know what you did. We need to talk." I sat down the documents and opened it. The email was from Caton. I recognized the pattern of it once I read past the subject line. The anonymous address was new, which told me his regular email had probably been flagged or restricted as part of the legal proceedings, but the voice was unmistakably his. Dramatic opener, calculated to provoke a response. The body of it was 3 paragraphs of escalating justification dressed up as accusation. He knew I had filed the complaint. He knew I had been behind it. He was giving me one chance to come clean and help him fix things before it got worse. I read it once, closed it, went back to the acquisition documents. That was the last direct communication I ever read from him. Everything after that, the calls, the voicemails, the 2 letters that arrived at an old address and got forwarded, I processed the same way. Enough to confirm the source, not enough to let it in. 3 years is a long time when you are building something. It is a short time when you are watching something collapse. Thornfield closed its second acquisition 8 months after the first. The third came a year later. A commercial property in a market I had been patient about. Priced well, clean title, no complications. Corbin, my analyst, had grown into someone I genuinely relied on. I brought on a second junior partner named Waverly about 18 months in. She had come from a fund that restructured and left a lot of good people without desks. She was precise and did not need managing. The business had a shape now, a real one. I bought a place of my own in the second year. Nothing that required explaining, just a clean space that was mine, with a mortgage I could carry comfortably and no one else's name on the deed. The woman I had been seeing since around month 8, I will keep her out of this. She is not part of the story and I would like it to stay that way, was steady and real and entirely removed from anything in my past. She knew the broad outline of what had happened. She did not need the details and did not ask for them. That was one of the things I valued most about her. I worked out in the mornings. I cooked most nights. I had a routine that was ordinary in a way I had not had before. And the ordinariness of it felt like something I had earned. Caton called 22 times across the first 18 months. My father called 6 times. My mother called more than I tracked. I stopped counting after the first year. None of them got through. Not one voicemail made it past the opening sentence before I deleted it. I want to be clear about something. This was not performance. It was not a sustained act of punishment I had to maintain consciously. I had simply closed the account. There was nothing in me that wanted to pick up, which made not picking up effortless. The calls were just a recurring notification I did not act on, like a subscription I had forgotten to cancel. Through Priya, who stayed in loose contact without ever pushing into territory I had not opened, I tracked the broad shape of what was happening back there. The audit findings had come back definitive. Caton settled 2 of the civil suits. The terms were not public, but Priya heard through the investor network that the payouts were significant enough to hollow out whatever liquid assets the business still had. The 3rd suit was still active. His business partner had filed his own separate claim against Caton personally, which meant Caton was not just fighting former investors anymore. He was fighting someone who had had an inside view of everything. My parents' loans defaulted 14 months after they signed them. Both of them, the bridging capital Caton had promised was temporary, had simply been absorbed into a business that was already too far underwater to be saved by any amount of bridging. The retirement savings they had put up as collateral were gone. The house entered foreclosure proceedings. Priya told me this on a Tuesday evening, her voice carrying that careful flatness she used when she was not sure how I would receive something. I received it fine. Caton and Ivy, whatever that had been, did not survive the pressure. It probably never had the structure to survive anything, which should have been obvious to both of them from the start. Ivy's firm had terminated her after the internal investigation concluded. She had left the city, rebuilt somewhere smaller, taken on clients with lower profiles and quieter expectations. Her name still appeared occasionally in industry contexts, but without the weight it used to carry. She had lost the thing she had valued most, which was not me. It was the reputation she had built over 10 years in a field where reputation was the only currency that mattered. Caton, by all accounts, was a man spending most of his time managing lawyers and debt in a family that had stopped being able to protect him from either. The family that had closed ranks around him, that had told me not to blow up what we had over one bad decision, had spent 3 years learning what it actually cost to keep covering for him. They were not blaming me anymore. From what Priya could tell, they were just tired and broke and stuck in a rental that was a significant downgrade from a house they had owned for 20 years. I thought about all of this the same way I thought about weather patterns in cities I no longer lived in, with a kind of passive awareness that did not require any particular response from me. Then on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd year, my building's front desk called up to my floor. The woman at the desk had a measured professional tone, the kind you use when a situation is unusual, but you are trying not to make it more unusual. She told me there was a woman in the lobby asking for me. She had arrived about 40 minutes ago. She had given my name. She said she was my mother. She had asked the woman to wait while she called up. The woman had not moved toward the exit. I sat with the phone against my ear for a moment. Then I told the desk I would be down shortly. I did not rush. I finished the page I was reading, capped my pen, and set the acquisition file to the side of my desk in a neat stack. I changed nothing about what I was wearing. I took the elevator down, watched the floor numbers descend, and when the doors opened, I crossed the lobby at a normal pace. She was standing near the far side of the entrance, not sitting. The lobby had seating, but she had not taken it. She was holding her handbag with both hands in front of her, the way people hold things when they need something to do with their hands. She looked smaller than I remembered, not fragile exactly, but reduced, like something had been compressing her slowly over a long period, and the compression was visible now in the way she carried herself. She saw me cross the lobby and something moved across her face. Relief, I think, that I had actually come down like she had not been certain I would. She started talking before I reached her. The house was going. The foreclosure had moved past the point where they could stop it on their own. My father's health had been difficult. She did not specify, just said difficult, and left the space open for me to ask about it. I did not ask. Caton was in a bad way. She said the lawsuits had taken everything. He was a different person now. Stress did things to people. Surely, I understood that. She said the family needed to find a way through this and she tried everything else and I was the only one left who could actually do something. Then she moved into the older material holiday. I remembered things she said she had been proud of. The word love appeared several times in several configurations. She talked about what family meant, not as an argument, more as a recitation, like if she could just get through all of it, something in me would reactivate. She talked for a long time. I let her. I stood there and I listened to all of it without interrupting, without shifting my weight, without giving her anything to read on my face. And while she talked, I was not running calculations or rehearsing responses. I was just present in the room, hearing her and aware with a clarity that had no heat in it, of exactly what this moment was. I remembered the breakfast table at the hotel, the coffee cup she had sat down, the specific arrangement of words she had chosen. You do not want to blow up the family over one bad decision. I remembered packing my bag while Caton stood in the doorway laughing. I remembered the number on my phone screen at midnight, $4,800, and the feeling of sitting with that in the dark next to a woman who was already asleep, who had had 19 days to move that money and had moved it anyway. I had not blown anything up. I had walked away from a fire that was already burning and let it burn. The house, the savings, the business, the reputation, none of that was mine. I had not taken a single thing from any of them. I just stopped putting myself between them and the consequences of their own decisions. That was all I had done. She reached the end of what she had prepared. She was looking at me with an openness that probably took something from her. My mother had never been someone who showed need easily. She reached out and took my hand in both of hers. She asked me to come home. I looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction or triumph or grief, just directly, with the full weight of someone who had made their peace with a hard thing a long time ago and did not need to revisit it. I gave her a slight smile, the kind that does not require explanation and does not invite response. I removed my hand from hers. Gently, I took one step back and I let the lobby door close between us. I took the elevator back up, sat down at my desk, picked up the acquisition file and found the page I had left off on. I kept working. Here is where everything stands for anyone who wants the current picture. Caton settled 2 of the 3 civil suits. The third is still active. His attorneys have been negotiating for months with no resolution in sight. His business is gone in any meaningful sense. Whatever he is doing now, it is not that Ivy is operating somewhere with a significantly lower profile. She has clients again, smaller ones, quieter engagements. Her name does not carry the weight it used to in the circles that matter to her. She rebuilt because she is capable, but she rebuilt smaller. That is her life now. My parents are in a rental fixed income. I do not know the daily details, and I do not need to. Thornfield Capital closed 3 acquisitions in the past 12 months. Corbin and Waverly are both full partners now. The pipeline is clean and the structure is exactly what I designed it to be. Solid, quiet, mine. I am looking at 2 more properties that make sense. The work is good. I am not posting this for validation. I do not need anyone to tell me I was right or that what I did was justified or that Caton and Ivy got what they deserved. The math on all of that is settled in my own head and it does not require outside confirmation. I am posting it because sometimes people need to hear that there is another way to respond to something that destroys you. Not therapy speak, not forgiveness as performance, not the slow crawl back to the table to make peace with people who never respected what they had. Just this: pack your bag, do your work, build the thing they said you could not, and when they come looking for the person they expected to fall apart, make sure all they find is a closed door. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Wishing you all the best, stay healthy, and take care.